Today we heard the Pharisees questioning why the disciples of Jesus did not observe ritual washing prior to eating. Now, they were not concerned primarily about hygiene as we might be in our modern day, but they were concerned really about observing the tradition of the elders that had been passed down to them. Jesus does not condemn that tradition, it should be noted. But he does speak about the importance of the interior life, noting that we are defiled not by food from outside of us, but by evil thoughts and actions that come from within us. Jesus is basically calling them and us to focus on what is most important. In the particular context of our gospel reading, as our Lord speaks to the scribes and Pharisees, the most important is their relationship with God, needing to be purified in their thoughts and actions, while the less important was the particular type of ritual purity being sought. From time to time in life, we have to examine ourselves and ask whether we are focusing on what is most important. Sometimes that type of introspection comes from taking a good look at our spiritual life. And sometimes it comes because an outside situation has forced us to take that look at things. We as a parish community are faced with one of those situations right now. As you know, we've been working for a while on designing and building a permanent church. About 9 days ago, we got the construction bids for what had been designed, and unfortunately, the amount came in higher than what we can afford. There's no room to cut much from the design because quite a bit has been cut already. And it's not realistic to think that we could raise another $2 or $3 million in the time it would take to make this work. And so, after discussing the matter with our parish pastoral and finance councils and with Bishop Taylor, I've made the painful decision to walk away from the design we've been working on and to move instead toward a new design that will still meet our needs while also being within our budget. Our need for a permanent church is still very real. This space that we're in right now was always meant to be temporary. We've gotten a lot of good use out of it, but it was never meant to be a permanent church. And if you're sitting in the back, you know exactly what I mean. A Catholic church is meant to be a place set aside for worship of God, to receive His Word and His sacraments. In addition, concerns in our own time now about school security make this combination building a great challenge when it comes to scheduling things like funerals or masses for holy days of obligation. So with all of that in mind, we have to work on a new design, one which will meet our needs, is within budget, and honors the desires of parishioners to have a beautiful church that is visibly Catholic. It must seat at least as many or likely more people than what our current combo chapel center plus cafeteria will seat. And it must not result in the loss of any parking spaces. It will almost certainly not be as tall as the design we have been preparing for. The reason to build tall is that the height should draw our minds to God and to heaven. But unfortunately, that height also adds a lot to the cost. We won't have the Gothic style we've seen in the renderings up until now. But certain things are still very possible. The tabernacle can still be centered behind the altar. The altar can be elevated to show its importance. And we will have a truly sacred space set apart for worship of God. Not a school cafeteria moonlighting as extra church seating. It's also worth remembering that just because it won't be a classical Gothic style does not mean that we will wind up with some kind of ultra-modern imitation UFO from the 1970s. I won't let that happen. We will, though, have a church that we can love and be proud of. This news is a setback, I know. but it's not the end of our dream. With everyone's support, we can still build a church. It won't be the design we've been looking at, but it will be the church that we need in order to be nourished by word and sacrament, to glorify God, and to have a spiritual home for generations to come. In order for that to happen, I do need to ask that you continue with your pledge fulfillment. A big part of how we get from where we are now to having an actual church is through the shared sacrifice of all of us as a community. I'm sure you have a lot of questions. I don't think I'll be able to answer them while shaking hands after Mass. But we will have some opportunities. First, we have a letter next to the bulletins and in the Great Hall as you leave Mass today, explaining the situation with a little more detail, some numbers, that sort of thing. The white copies are in English and the yellow copies are in Spanish. Second, we'll have a question and answer session about the project. That's scheduled for September the 19th at 7 p.m. And if you have a more immediate question that cannot wait until then, there's an email address at the bottom of that letter that I mentioned, that if you pick that up on the way out, you'll see that. Again, I know it's bad news, and I don't like delivering bad news any more than anyone else does. But one thing I always try to remember when confronted with bad news is that God is ultimately in control. He does indeed control the whole process. We may not be able to have what we wanted. We may not be getting it on our schedule, but we will have what we need, and we will have it in God's time. And along the way, I expect He will remind us often of what is most important in our relationship with Him. One last word. Next weekend, I'll be out of town. I've got a wedding I'm presiding at in St. Louis, Missouri. So when you don't see me next weekend, don't think that I've run away or gone into hiding or something. It's just something that was planned months before I knew all this would be happening.